The writer of Hebrews penned this letter to a first century church comprised of Jews who had surrendered their lives to Christ. However, these Jewish Christians did not expect that following Christ could or would result in hardship. Hardship which included persecution as well as loss of property, and it was their expectation they would eventually perhaps even lose their own lives. Consequently, they stood on the precipice of exiting Christianity and going back into Old Testament Judaism, where they believed they would find much kinder treatment. Therefore, encouragement came to this congregation via this epistle for these people to stay the course in following Christ, who for the joy set before him endured the pain, bore the shame, and persevered through the humiliation of the cross. The writer of Hebrews brilliantly employed an illustration from their own Israeli history that he believed would serve as inspiration for these Jewish Christian believers to continue on with Christ. An illustration actually employed by the writer of Psalm chapter 95. An illustration based on Israeli history in the books of the law. That is Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. So let's read those verses beginning with verse 7 of Hebrews 3. And if you'd like to stand with me, please do that at this moment. Beginning with verse 7, the writer says, "Therefore, just as the Holy Spirit says, today, as you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as when they provoked me, as on the day of trial in the wilderness, where your fathers put me to the test and saw my works for 40 years. Therefore, I was angry with this generation and said they always go astray in their heart, and they did not know my ways. As I swore in my anger, they certainly shall not enter my rest." You may be seated. Now, we learned last week that the day of trial in the wilderness referred to a period of time that began in Exodus chapter 5 and then culminated in Numbers chapter 14. And I gave you the specific location of each of these tests. Do you remember? Well, I'm going to put it up there again. Here's where you find specifically those 10 tests that God gave to them. Exodus chapter 5, verse 21. Exodus chapter 14, verses 10 through 12. Go ahead and hit the next slide. It should come up. There you go. Exodus chapter 15, verse 24. Exodus chapter 16, verses 2 and 3. Exodus 17, verses 2 and 3. Exodus 32, verses 1 through 4. Numbers 11, verses 1 through 2. Numbers 12, verses 1 through 9. Numbers 13, verses 31 through 33. Then Numbers 14, verses 2 through 4. Now, these tests would affirm one of two things. One, it would affirm Israel's readiness for nation building in Canaan. Go ahead and throw that up there. It would affirm Israel's readiness for nation building in Canaan. And two, it would demonstrate Israel's unfitness for the opportunity they had been given by God. God never puts a person or a people to a great task without testing them first to see if they are ready for what is ahead, to ascertain their preparedness. Well, you would not ask a first grader to go out and do what an eighth grader might do. That would be ridiculous. Did you know it's the same way in the life of the believer? You do not ask an immature Christian to go out and do what you might ask a mature Christian to do. And so all along the way, we are going to have a series of tests that shows God where we are. Are we ready? Or will we fail in the opportunity? So would these ancient Israelis pass the test? Were they ready for Canaan? Well, let's take a peek at each of those tests. And as we do, we're going to see if we can discern any recurring patterns. So the first test is found in Exodus 5. Now, as you know, the Egyptians had a reputation as builders, and their kind of building required large stones, but smaller building required bricks. It just so happened that the Egyptians forced the nation of Israel to produce those bricks. Tough work, to be sure, in that Middle Eastern sun. However, at least the Egyptian government provided the straw necessary to make those bricks from a mixture of mud and straw. Well, when Moses requested that Pharaoh release the Israelites for 3 days that they might journey into the wilderness for the purpose of worship, not only did the Pharaoh refused to release the Israelites, but in his anger, he stopped providing straw for the brickmakers while requiring the same quota of bricks to be produced. So this is what it meant. It meant that the Israeli brickmakers now had to go out, find, and gather straw themselves, which made their task impossible. Let's pick up with verse 13 in Exodus 5. The taskmasters pressed them, that is the Israeli workers, saying, complete your work quota, your daily amount, just as when you had straw. Moreover, verse 14 says, the foremen of the sons of Israel, whom Pharaoh's taskmasters had set over them, were beaten and asked, why have you not completed your required task of making bricks either yesterday or today as before? When Israel's brickmaker union complained to Pharaoh, they found no remedy. Let's pick up with verse 19. Are y'all hearing a sound? There's sort of a... When Olivia comes back in here, there is a hum, there is a buzz in this system, if you'd check it out. So let's pick up with verse 19. The foreman of the sons of Israel saw that they were in trouble. When they left Pharaoh's presence, they met Moses and Aaron as they were waiting for them. And they said to them, may the Lord look upon you and judge you, because you have made us repulsive in Pharaoh's sight and in the sight of his servants, to put a sword in his hand to kill us. That's test 1. The second test is found in Exodus 14. By this time in the story of Israel's Exodus, the Pharaoh had released Israel to go into the wilderness. No fewer than 2 million Israelis, perhaps as many as 3 million, headed east with Canaan, the promised land, as their destination. However, the Pharaoh soon changed his mind and gave orders to bring the former captives back. Exodus 14 says it like this, beginning with verse 5. Pharaoh and his servants had a change of heart toward the people. And they said, well, what is this that we have done? That we have let Israel go from serving us. Do you remember what we said this past Sunday about the tendency of governments? That they have a tendency to take and they have a tendency to dominate. Why did they want the Israelis back? That they themselves might be served. Verse 6. So he, the Pharaoh, had horses harnessed to his chariot and took his people with him. And he took 600 select chariots and all the other chariots of Egypt with officers over all of them. Then the Egyptians chased after them, that is the Israeli people, with all the horses and chariots of Pharaoh, his horsemen and his army, and they overtook Israel camping by the sea. Now look at verse 10. As Pharaoh approached, the sons of Israel looked, and behold, the Egyptians were coming after them, and they became very frightened. So the sons of Israel cried out to the Lord. Then they said to Moses, is it because there were no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? Why have you dealt with us in this way, bringing us out of Egypt? Have you noticed all the you words in these passages? You is a fighting word. Unless you say, I love you, I need you, I want you, you is a fighting word. And the Israeli people were constantly saying to Moses, you said, you did, you made. Of course, none of us ever experienced that in this life. Notice verse 12. More reproach. Is not this the word that we spoke to you in Egypt, saying, leave us alone, so that we may serve the Egyptians? For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. Did you note any connection between test 1 and test 2? Can you see any similarities? Now, I gave you that assignment last week, and in fact, I had 3 people who gave me some paperwork on the assignment. I'm going to bring that into play in just a little bit. The assignment was to look at each of these 10 tests and discover the similarities, the commonalities between all of these tests. The third test is found in Exodus 15. As we know, a great celebration occurred on the east bank of the Red Sea. God had opened the sea so that the Israelites, as the Bible says, crossed on dry ground. After crossing over, the Egyptian army drove their chariots into the same dry passage used by the Hebrews during their pursuit. While in the middle of the sea, God closed the water over Egypt's army, and they were destroyed. Well, they threw a big party on the east bank. Songs were written about the victory that God had brought about at the Red Sea. A band played and the people danced, and they had a big cape with horns blowing and hats that they were wearing. It was a terrific time. After the party, Moses led the people further into the wilderness. In fact, we're told 3 days further as they continued toward Canaan. Well, after 3 days, these 2 to 3 million people ran out of water. Now remember, they had just celebrated a huge, miraculous triumph over Egypt. They thought they were done for, and God swooped in and saved the day. So now here 3 days later, they have a need for water, and surely you would think after such a victory at the Red Sea that the need for water would be nothing more than a blip on the map, right? Well, let's check it out, beginning with verse 22. They went 3 days in the wilderness and found no water. When they came to Marah, they could not drink the waters of Marah because they were bitter. For that reason, it was called Marah, which means bitterness. So the people grumbled at Moses, saying, what are we to drink? That's exactly how they said it, except in Hebrew, which makes it sound even worse. Did you note any connection between tests 1, 2, and 3? Could you see any similarities? The fourth test is found in Exodus 16. 45 days had now passed since exiting Egypt. In chapter 15, the Israelis had no water. Now, in chapter 16, they had no food. How would they respond? Oh, I know, stop by Burger King and have it your way. Except all the Burger Kings had closed down due to the plague. Beginning with verse 2, we make that discovery. The whole congregation of the sons of Israel, what's that next word? Grumble. Grumbled against Moses and Aaron. Who was Aaron? He was the brother of Moses, and he was the high priest of the Israelis. The sons of Israel said to them, if only we had died by the Lord's hand in the land of Egypt, when we sat by pots of meat. Well, they had to go to Chipotle for that. When we ate bread until we were full. For you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill this entire assembly with hunger. Right, that is what Moses did. He said, I want you to follow me into the wilderness, and I'm going to kill you with hunger. Don't you think that was in his mind? Sure it was. Did you see any connection between tests 1, 2, and 3? Could you see any similarities? Then the fifth test is found in Exodus 17. Once again, water had become a problem. Now, one would think that after seeing the miracle of God at the Red Sea, and one would think after water being provided at Marah, here is this problem again, which, you can say, look, you got 2 or 3 million people in the desert, water is going to be an issue right along. Well, you would think, based on what they had seen God do, that they would say, this is no mountain for a climber. God's got this. Well, listen to the complaint of the people again against Moses. There was no water for the people to drink, so the people quarreled with Moses and said, give us water. It's a demand so that we may drink. And Moses said to them, why do you quarrel with me? Why do you test the Lord? Now, wait a minute. They are fussing with Moses. And Moses said, why are you testing the Lord? Verse 3. But the people were thirsty for water there, and they, what's that next word? Grumbled against Moses and said, why is it that you, can you say it with me like that? You have brought us up from Egypt to kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst. Oh, yeah, that was in his mind. I mean, don't you feel it? Yeah, he just wanted to kill him from the outset. So any connection here seen between tests 1, 2, 3, and 4? Any similarities? The sixth test is found in Exodus 32. Let's read verses 1 through 4. When the people saw that Moses had delayed to come down from the mountain, the people assembled around Aaron and said to him, come, make us a god who will go before us, for this Moses. Don't you love it when people have a disagreement with you and they said, your family, your mama, your daddy, this Moses, the man who brought us up from the land of Egypt, look at this. We do not know what has happened to him. And Aaron said to them, tear off the gold rings which are in the ears of your wives, your sons, your daughters. I used to love to just get under my daddy's skin because he hated guys with earrings. I mean, he was that generation. He was born in the 20s. Guys with earrings, guys with sideburns, guys with hair over their ears. these were big no-nos. And so I just tried to get under my daddy's skin. And I said, Daddy, don't you see that the ancient Israel, the men wore earrings? He hated me a lot in those days. And bring them to me. So all the people tore off. Oh, by the way, I have a son who wears earrings. You don't have to say it with glee, okay? It's just a fact. Earrings, tat sleeves, yeah. I'd put them up against anybody I know. So all the people tore off the gold rings which were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. Then he took the gold from their hands and fashioned it with an engraving tool and made it into a cast metal calf. You know, when Moses ultimately came down from the mountain, you know what Moses said to, or Aaron said to Moses when Moses said, "What the heck have you done?" There was another H word that Moses used. I'm not inclined to use that one tonight. What have you done? He says, I just threw this gold into the fire and out popped this calf. Well, he would fit right in with a lot of people I know today. And they said, this is your God, Israel, who brought you up from the land of Egypt. Any connection between the first 5 tests and this one? Could you see any similarities? The 7th test is found in Numbers 11, beginning with verse 1. The people became like those who complain of adversity. Don, I think these were Methodists, not Baptists. You never hear Baptists complaining about anything. Now look at verse 4. The rabble among them, who were among them. You know, as a pastor in full-time ministry for over 47 years, I know what the word rabble means. There's always rabble. And you can tell them easily. The rabble who were among them had greedy cravings. And the sons of Israel also wept again and said, who will give us meat to eat? We remember the fish which we used to eat for free in Egypt. The cucumbers. The melons, the leeks, the onions, and the garlic. I mean, we've almost got roast beef right here, right, don't we? The stew's coming up. I can smell it now. But now our appetite is gone. There's nothing at all to look at except this manna. It wasn't that they didn't have anything to eat. It was just they were sick and tired of the manna with which God had fed them for weeks and weeks on end. They had plenty to eat. They just didn't have what they wanted. We all sort of kind of get that way, don't we? Moses heard the people, millions of them, weeping throughout their families, each one at the entrance of his tent. And he probably heard them saying, Moses just doesn't care. Moses! The 8th test occurred in Numbers 12, verses 1 through 9, and regarded leadership fellowship. I want to read at least 2 verses, or a portion of the two verses, beginning with verse 1. Miriam and Aaron, we know who Aaron is. Aaron was Moses' brother, and Miriam was his sister. Miriam and Aaron, brother and sister, spoke against Moses. And I love this. Is it a fact that the Lord has spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us as well? Well, how many pastors have gone through that during their years of ministry? We'll talk about that later. In Numbers 13 came the 9th test. The Israelites had reached the southernmost tip of Canaan, located at Kadesh Barnea. I showed that to you on a map last week. Moses sent out 12 men to reconnoiter the land, as he said in verse 18, see what the land is like, and whether the people who live in it are strong or weak, whether they are few or many. And how is the land in which they live? Is it good or bad? And how are the cities in which they live? Are the people in open camps or in fortifications? And how is the land? Is it productive? Is it unproductive? Are there trees in it or not? And get us some of the fruit of the land. So off they skedaddled. At the end of 40 days, the reconnoiter team had returned and gave a report of what they had seen and gathered. There were two reports. There was a majority report and a minority report. The majority report, as many of you know, won the day, and here's that report beginning with verse 28. The people who live in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. We are not able to go up against the people because they are too strong for us. So they brought a bad report of the land which they had spied out to the sons of Israel, saying, the land through which we have gone is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people whom we saw in it are people of great stature. And we were like grasshoppers in our own sight. And so we were in their sight. The 10th test, the final test, took place in Numbers 14. Check out verses 2 and following. All the sons of Israel, what's that next word? Are we not sick and tired of seeing that word? And all the sons of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron, and the entire congregation said to them, they'd been going from tent to tent, taking a poll, if only we had died in the land of Egypt, or only if we had died in this wilderness. So why is the Lord bringing us into this land to fall by the sword? Our wives and our little ones will become plunder. Would it not be better for us to return to Egypt? So they said to one another, let's appoint a leader and return to Egypt. So we have looked at the 10 tests of readiness faced by the Israelites. Now watch this. They failed every test. But why? Can a cause for their failure be identified? The answer is yes. And their failure consisted of two recurring elements. Now, there's a whole lot more we could talk about here. And in fact, we will talk about more of these things when we finish up this paragraph of Scripture 1 week from today. So I ask folks, do some homework, read these 10 tests, tell me what you find about the recurring commonalities. Bill, where are you? Sitting right back there. Bill, welcome. He gives 3 reasons. 1, lots of blaming. 2, lack of faith. 3, expecting someone else to do something without they themselves expressing any faith in God. Here is Jan Lucas. Jan went through every one of these passages. She put each passage in her own words. That's always a good way to study the Bible, right? She put them each in her own words. Yeah, I have them right here. And then she said applications for today. Because you know, folks, it doesn't matter what the Bible says. If we can't apply it to today, it is worthless. So she applied it. Freedom is in the hearts of us all. To have real freedom, we must do it God's way. The Israelites had seen the miraculous leading of the Lord in the plagues God sent on the Egyptians, and the pillar of fire by day and the pillar of smoke by night. They knew the promises of God from their forefathers, but they wanted to do things their own way instead of God's way. She may be preaching the next couple of weeks. Next paragraph. Israel was grumbling all the way to the land God had promised them because they encountered challenges along the way. Wouldn't it be great if we could have a challenge-free life? It ain't never going to happen. And especially if you're serving God. They did not turn to God to help them. Again, they wanted to do things their way. Paragraph 3. Sometimes, when life gets challenging, it is easy to try to take things into my own hands instead of remembering God's promises and standing firm in our faith. We live a life based on promises, do we not? When you've got an issue, when you've got a problem, when you've got trouble, you find the promise of God that is applicable to that situation, and you rehearse it, and you rehearse it, and you rehearse it, and you rehearse it. Thank you for that insight. The challenges are designed to increase our faith. You mean God's always working? He's always working? Even when life stinks, God's working? I just don't know what God's doing in my life. He's working. That's His promise. So the challenges are designed to increase our faith so we can honor God as we journey this life. I am reminded of the song, I have decided to follow Jesus, no turning back, no turning back. What do you think? Yeah. Pretty good stuff, right? And that comes from a woman. What are you laughing about? You think God can speak through women? You do? You do?
God's working.
Never use my own words against me. All right, this is from Steve Lucas, sitting right here. Did you guys do this together? Did y'all cheat off each other? You didn't cheat, did you? Well, I got to tell you, Steve, you should have cheated off Jan. I'm kidding. And again, he took all these passages, everyone, and put them in his own words. What a great way to study, as long as you know what the words mean, to help you get it right. So here's how he summarized it. The people complained about Moses to God at every adversity during their exodus from Egypt on their way to the land promised by God. Because of Moses and God's failure, this is the view of the people, right? They were going to die in the wilderness. Well, that's what they thought. And actually, we know about 800,000 of them did eventually, but we hadn't gotten to that part yet. Then here's the application. Very unbaptistic here. When things go wrong, don't blame God or His agents. I'm an agent, by the way. Don't go around blaming me or God. All right. And here's the second part of the application. It is better to trust God and follow His leading. Didn't these three people do a great job? Yeah, they really did. They really did. Their failure consisted of two recurring elements. And here's the first. In each test, the people of Israel grumbled against the leadership. Go ahead and click that next one. Grumbled against the leadership God had provided through Moses. God provides leadership. Some congregations moan, oh, if we could only have a leader like Moses, we would follow him without complaint. Really? Really? That's not how it happened with Israel. And Israel had Moses. Did you know Moses was a goat? He was one of history's all-time great leaders, the greatest of all time, the goat. Next time you think of Moses, admire the goat. They complained about leadership. If we only had a different leader. Second, in each test, they questioned the power of God to accomplish the impossible. Now, I want you to take note that their disbelief cannot be seen as a lack of faith in the past. They believed that God had performed mighty works against Egypt. They knew what God had done at the Red Sea. They had no problem trusting God for what had already occurred. They simply would not trust Him for what needed to occur in the present moment. It is easy to live by faith in the past. It is something else altogether to live by faith in the present. If anyone here, or is anyone here, able to point to some great work that God did in years past, but refused to believe His provision for the present? How many of you have believed God for things in the past that you know God worked on your behalf? Why does that not carry over into the present moment? But what do you mean? Have you ever grumbled and complained when you have a problem in the present moment? Have you ever said, Lord, what are you doing? Have you ever used choice words to the Lord? I just don't know if I'm even going to believe in you. Just right when I need you, you aren't here. That is called faithlessness. I don't care what God has done in the past. It is what we believe Him to do in the present. Nobody here has a problem believing that God saved them long ago, yet have great difficulty trusting Him to provide whatever may be necessary for the task at hand. I think that we ought to change the Southern Baptist Convention's name to the Belly Aching Baptist Convention. What do you think? Look, I've been a Southern Baptist all my life. I are one, so I can talk about it. At Israel's 10th failure, God knew, remember the number 10 is the number for a completed testimony, a finished trial. After the 10th failure, God knew that their spiritual adversity was too deep for victory in Canaan. Their repeated failure to act upon His word and to follow His leader left no doubt that they were not ready to serve as a light to the nations. No further testimony needed. No additional evidence needed to be collected. God would have to raise up another generation to do His work, which is exactly what He did. People had to die off before God could lead Israel in a miraculous way into Canaan. And I got to tell you today, there are a lot of churches that are waiting on people to die who have been holding them back from moving forward. This is what happened to Israel as a nation. God had to raise up another generation. It can happen to nations today. I would suggest to you it is happening to America in our day. It can happen to individual churches today. And it can happen to individuals today. God just takes His hand off. I've given you every test, He says. You have proven yourself unfaithful and unfit. Therefore, I'm going to sit you on the shelf somewhere and wait till you die.